Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. I worked with electrification of road transport for 2 to 3 decades. I actually come from electrical machines and power electronics area, and since that kind of technology is present in both hybrid and plug-in hybrid and full electric vehicles and in the charging systems, it's been unavoidable to work with that. And I'd say that almost from the start it became evident that partly or fully electrified vehicles, they are much more energy efficient than combustion equivalents, that we know. And the last decades, EVs have started to claim a growing share of the market, and lately electric vehicles have become a requirement that has gone so far so many OEMs have decided to abandon combustion engine development, which is quite significant, I think. So far so good, but then I need to advance this one. But up to now, electrification has been interesting just because it is efficient, but it hasn't been a marginal thing that we can consider and play with. But now it's serious. We know that we're up against a challenge for the world that is quite difficult. We have to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions significantly to keep temperature and order in the world in place. We know that we must break a path of CO2 emissions from all sources, and transport has a significant share of that, and must take the responsibility for that share. So we know it is urgent, but do we really know how to do this? This fantastic drop in CO2 emissions that we need to accomplish. We have and we debate several alternatives. We have biofuel. We have electrofuels. See if this works. Hydrogen, electrofuels. We have various forms of electrification. Plug-in charging at home, fast charging along the road. We even have electric road technology today. And we know that all these technologies work. We can do what we want to do with a single vehicle with any of these. We know that already. Even the newcomer on the block, the electric roads, have turned out mature enough to be put on public roads. But as well as we know that, we still don't know exactly how to upscale this. The word upscaling is the challenge of the moment. We need to reach 100% electromobility by somewhere around the mid of this century. And there are many questions to answer. Do we have enough biofuels? Can we produce and distribute enough green hydrogen? Professor Sebon has already told no. Can we produce enough batteries? How many fast charging stations do we need? How much electric road systems would we possibly need if we want to go about this? The energy transition that we need to implement takes decades, and we only have one chance, in my opinion. It is a very important thing that we move in the right direction now. A country that is way ahead of us is Norway. They have already reached almost 1/4 of a full electric vehicle fleet and sell over 80% full electric vehicles by today. Their experience of upscaling gives us a hint of what we are up against. That is why Lars, what was it? Godbolt is not okay. Lars, that's why Lars is here. As a voice of the Norwegian EV upscaling experience. And I like to throw numbers at people, and I will throw numbers on you. Some of you have already been hit by this, but I will take one example that I extrapolate from Norway. I think is really interesting. I recognize that since about 2018, that for the last 5-6 years, Norway has a density, I would like to call it, of fast charging stations at about 1 fast charger per 100 full electric vehicles. This is an empirically found level that provides a reasonable waiting time on fast charging stations at times of high traffic. I don't think you in Norway have decided to build way more fast chargers than you need. I think that is a level that is in balance with the practical life with electric vehicles. If we keep that density, if we assume that the rest of Europe is like Norway, then we apply that principle to the 10T comprehensive network, which is 130,000 kilometers across Europe. And we assume that we have a fast charging station every 60 kilometers, as AFIR is recommending. Then the Norwegian level of density level corresponds to, and hold on now, 1,100 fast chargers every 60 kilometers. You heard me right. 1,500. That's about 100 football fields, I think, every 60 kilometers. Can we do it? I don't say that this is that everybody is like Norwegians, but I think we are not in the rest of Europe too different from Norwegians. We have to take this serious. It is not obvious that the upscaling of electromobility this way is easy. It looks so now, but I have doubts, and that's why I think it's so interesting to listen to you, Lars, and to hear the Norwegian experience. And here we have the motivation for this conference to answer the question of realism with upscaling of the different technologies, not only electrification with batteries and roads and fast chargers, but all the other alternatives as well. What are the main obstacles on the way to a significant reduction of CO2 emissions from road transport? Which technology or combination of technologies gives the highest likelihood of success in abating CO2 emission from road transport in a 10 to 25 year perspective, which is what we are talking about. That is to answer those questions. That is one of the reasons for having this conference. Another reason is to present the results that has come from evaluating one of these technologies, the on-road technology that we will look at more today. To answer these scientific questions, this challenge that I've tried to talk about, the project Evolution Road has engaged an external expertise, external to the project, to approach the challenge. And now I should show that slide. To approach the challenge in a broad and in an objective way. When we talked about having this conference, thank you, we said that it should be a result conference. We should present what we have accomplished, how good the electric road works. And we said that no, that will only be a conference where we tell how good we are, but not how we fit in. So we need someone objectively to look at how does this technology, which works, fit into the bigger picture. And Jakob Rogstadius at RISE has led the work with a strong support from a lot of partners that I will not mention all by name. You see them on the slide. We have had some co-authors that have spent a lot of time under the leadership of Jakob to put this paper together that I believe all of you have access to now. And in addition to them, all these acknowledgements for strong support that you see down on the bottom of the slide is a lot of specialists that have been following along the way and supported and commented and made the documents as good as it can be up to now. But we want these 2 days, today and tomorrow, to be used to challenge the conclusions that we have reached so far. We want discussions, opinions, we want feedback. We will work that into the final version of the report to make it better before publishing it to a much wider audience. And that with your help. So with these words, I hand over to Jakob from RISE to present a summary of the work so far.
Thank you. Indeed, so this is at least an attempt to do an independent review of different pathways to decarbonize EU road transport, and as much as possible by 2035. RISE is not tied to this Evolution Road project, although it's a very interesting project. Evolution Road has provided a lot of information to this analysis, but so have a lot of other stakeholders, including, for instance, the hydrogen section of Daimler Trucks. So the goals have been to compare different pathways to decarbonize transport and try to do that in some kind of comparable metrics, and to really look at what alternatives do we still have to decarbonize EU road transport in a quick way. To set a little background, so what are we trying to achieve? Well, the scientific advice for the EU is to reduce carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions from all of the EU economy by 77 to 87% by 2035 versus the 1990 reference level. It's quite significant. For road traffic, we are today about 20% above 1990. We're not doing very well with the 25 years that we've had, or no, it's more, 35 years. We've had to improve things so far. We have another 10 years to drop. It's going to be tougher now than it was. And the current ambition level that the EU has set through policy is to eliminate tailpipe emissions from light vehicles by 2035 in the new sales. There are no targets for the rolling stock. And for the same year, reduce the emissions from new trucks by 65%. Again, no targets for the rolling stock, and this is versus the 2019 level, not the lower 1990 level. The technologies we've looked at are the ones that both Mats and David described. It's combustion engine vehicles operated with fuels, fossil fuels, biofuels or electrofuels. It's battery electric vehicles, both new vehicles and those converted from combustion engine vehicles, and you replace the powertrain to an electric one. And you power those either with what we call slow charging, this is more well defined in the report, fast charging or electric road systems. We have fuel cell vehicles powered with only green hydrogen, which means that it comes from it's basically sustainable. Unlike the hydrogen that we produce today, that is all from fossil fuels. And this is produced in multiple different locations. We've looked at different prices that result from this, as well as different ways of transporting and delivering it to the truck, either in gaseous or liquid form. And they have different properties associated with these. And we try to summarize this in a levelized cost per kilometer, levelized emissions per kilometer, and estimate the kind of maximum scalability. How much of the EU road transport by kilometers could run on this fuel technology by 2035, if all goes well and if things don't go so well. And we also tried to, this is not the focus of the study, but we have looked at complementary strategies to reduce transport demand, which is, it's really complementary. It's not something that you can do instead of. Even if you reduce transport demand by half, you still need to decarbonize road transport as quickly as you do otherwise. You cannot, no matter how quickly we decarbonize road transport, we likely still need to work with demand reduction. So they are complementary. We try to cite sources whenever we find them, but we do need to do a lot of unit conversions, and for some things there aren't really good sources, so then we have to do some calculations. For road transport demand reduction, the short version is that we don't really see mature, scalable template solutions that you can just roll out. There are lots of examples of initiatives that have reduced demand in some little focus area where they have a neighborhood or so on, but to say that you can achieve this on an EU level by 2035, I strongly doubt it. When we talk about moving cargo to rail and waterways, well, the vast majority of both cargo and people transport goes on roads today. So doubling the capacity of rail and waterways is not going to have a significant impact on the road transport. So unfortunately, that is also not going to result in a significant emissions reduction in this time frame. And in fact, from what we understand, the most likely way impact this will have is that it will reduce the increase rather than actually reduce the amount of transport. Biofuels, they are the first technology that we look at. They are in use today. They contribute about 6% of EU road transport by final energy. If we assume a reasonable cost of carbon and account for that as part of the system cost of using biofuels and fossil fuels, then they have roughly the same cost as fossil fuels by 2035. But it's very difficult to increase supply of biofuels because very quickly you start competing with food production. This means that you need new technology, you need new carbon sources, things like wood residues, and many of these come with increases in cost, and that is not very likely. If you need to triple the cost of the product, you're less likely to sell it, right? So we don't think biofuels can be scaled up much further. A little further maybe, but not much further. Hydrogen and e-fuels. The short version is exactly what David said. It's way too expensive. The green hydrogen is not available today. You can barely buy it. Supply is much less than the proposed uses by 2035. And by that I mean the different sectors in which we want to use green hydrogen, the sum of the demand from those sectors if we use it, then if we rank these as, this is based on Michael Liebreich's hydrogen ladder, if we estimate this demand from the sectors that have higher merit than road transport, things like fertilizer production, steel production, where there are fewer alternatives, then we don't have any hydrogen for road transport because demand is still greater than supply. Then whether there's a demand, that depends on the cost, of course, but at least we should use it where it actually results in great decarbonization. This also means that if we use green hydrogen in road transport, we are not having any carbon reduction from a system level. We're just forcing somebody else to use fossil fuels somewhere else. It's expensive through all pathways that we look at. There is no pathway that leads to cheap hydrogen. There are studies that say we can have cheap hydrogen, but they, as far as we can understand, neglect to count several costs included in this chain. And we have looked at a lot of studies. We haven't had time to read all studies. There are plenty more. But this is really the best of my ability to look and understand this. There is also very little potential for cost reduction when you start adding up all the costs that are involved. Most of them are not things like reducing the cost of the electrolyzers. That is not going to bring down cost by 2/3. That is going to bring down cost maybe 5%. E-fuels, most of the fundamental problems with hydrogen come with transporting hydrogen in some way. A lot of those problems are solved with e-fuels. E-fuels are much easier to transport than hydrogen. Unfortunately, it's even less energy efficient, and the cost is not any more attractive. It also requires a carbon source. So in addition to requiring this green hydrogen supply, you now need sustainable carbon. Either you do that with biological sources, then you compete with biofuels and reduce the supply of those, or you can do carbon capture in some way, and that technology is not available in a way that we can scale it up. Certainly not in a cost-efficient manner. Do you want to invest in this? Well, probably not, given that we also try to phase this out. So by the time you might have a mature technology and you have your plant up and running, then it's time to ramp down. Battery electric is the only pathway that we see is really scalable, that you can affect a large share of the transport system in this time frame. Compared to the other solutions, it offers the lowest cost. The electricity supply is rapidly decarbonizing, which means that if you replace the vehicles with electric ones, they will continue emitting less and less and less the longer we use them. The batteries, however, do contribute significant emissions during production, and this is primarily an issue for light vehicles, because all vehicles need batteries. We have many, many more light vehicles than heavy vehicles, and therefore we end up with about 90%-ish of all the batteries sitting in light vehicles. So it's those that contribute to the embodied emissions. And we also have a problem with uptake in the near term. So we sell new vehicles, and that's how we imagine battery electric vehicles are going to enter the stock. But we primarily sell new vehicles in North and West Europe. South and East Europe doesn't really buy that many brand new vehicles. They buy primarily used vehicles from North and West Europe. So they are going to be maybe 10 years behind if we go that pathway of introducing new vehicles. Electric road systems, I should say ballpark estimates here. It's a technology that it's possible to reach the lowest cost of charging. It's not necessarily the lowest cost of charging. You can always offer a higher price, but we see potential for reaching this. We see at least 50% smaller battery packs, and there are lots of studies that show this to conclude roughly the same thing, is between 50 to 75%, pretty much what David said. This reduces the vehicle cost on the heavy side, and it reduces embodied emissions from light vehicles. We don't see much cost reduction on the light vehicles because you also need new ERS-specific parts in the vehicle. And we do expect batteries to cost much less in 2035 than they do today. So today, the vehicle would be cheaper, but today we don't have electric roads. We do believe electric roads would contribute to reaching 100% electric new vehicle sales at an earlier date. For light vehicles, this isn't going to make that much difference because we already ban anything else from 2035. For heavy vehicles, this would likely add more electric vehicles to the vehicle stock. As I will come back to on the next slide, ERS would also make conversions, so replacing retrofits, converting in combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicle, more likely to happen. We don't go in depth into this, but for reasons I will explain, it seems much more feasible for such a market to take off if we have a pan-European electric road system. The problems with ERS are, of course, that it's a massive upfront investment. We need to build at least 50,000 kilometers. That's the length of the 10T core network. And this we expect would only be sufficient for heavy vehicles. If we need passenger cars, light vehicles to participate, we expect at least 100,000 kilometers in Europe by 2030. When we look into the bottlenecks, would this be feasible? We don't really find engineering problems. We do maintain a lot of roads. What the technology suppliers say we can build out at that like kilometers per hour, kilometers per day. It scales. But to get this through the regulatory processes and actually get support in the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation by 2026 in the revision, and then make decisions and do all the planning and national approval processes and so on, that will be challenging. It's maybe doable. It was doable for COVID and the vaccines, but can we do it for this? I don't know. There's also very little support from the vehicle OEMs, and I think they don't gain so much from it, honestly. Might be a reason. So it's unclear if this is on the table or not. We're not sure. Electric retrofits. This is a table trying to summarize some rough estimates of how feasible it is from an economic perspective with and without access to dynamic charging, as well as for light and heavy vehicles. With only static charging, then we have larger batteries. So we have an investment cost for a retrofit in parts only that is quite significantly greater than the estimated sum of reduction in operating costs over half of the lifetime of an electric vehicle. If we add dynamic charging for the light vehicles, then we are suddenly closer. We're still on the low end of getting this return on investment. But it's at least in the same magnitude. If we look at the heavy vehicles, it's pretty much the same thing. With static charging alone, we are not probably going to make the money back from a retrofit. And this is excluding the labor, which is the cost of labor is going to differ a lot by where you do this and how mature the technologies are, how modular the vehicles are, and so on. With dynamic charging, you are definitely going to make the money back. But it's not, and it's red because there was an error in the report here. The report contains other numbers. I'm not quite sure how we ended up with those. Sorry. We'll fix that. It's not clear-cut, but it should be enough to show that this is worth investigating. If we talk about instead how much of, if we get an electric road system in place by 2030, then by 2035, how much of the rolling electric vehicle stock is going to be adapted to using an electric road? Because none of the vehicles out there today could use this. So how many of the vehicles would be added after 2030, between 2030 and 2035? And we see that in the Nordics here, yeah, sure. We're going to sell a lot of vehicles before this time, before 2030, that will not be ready to use an electric road. It doesn't mean we will have fewer vehicles here than we will somewhere else, but a smaller ratio. If we look at South and East Europe, and if we look at trucks, then most of them. We are going to ramp up sales, and in the meantime we build out electric roads, and then the vehicles should be adapted to this because they were introduced after the introduction of the new charging method. From a cost-saving perspective, we see fossil fuels and biofuels on par with each other in cost, and this is including then a cost of carbon that is reasonable, not an unreasonable cost of carbon as we have today. We see that in the light-duty segment, the vehicle itself contributes a lot of the lifetime cost. Which means that if you reduce the cost of the fuel, you don't have that much impact. We see that fast charging is estimated to cost about twice as much as home charging at night, but it's still not a massive difference. It might feel different when you own the car, but over the lifetime of the vehicle, what you spend on having this vehicle is mostly dependent on whether you buy a premium or basic car. With dynamic charging, yes, it could likely be even cheaper. It's certainly the cheapest daytime charging, but it's again, this is not a deal breaker in terms of cost, whichever method you charge the vehicle. E-fuels not recommended. There's so much inefficiencies in this that we don't see the cost coming down. For heavy vehicles, it's mostly operating costs. This does not include the cost of trailers, which you might have some rules of thumb of how much is capital expense and how much is operating expense in heavy trucking, and that might distort things a bit if you include the trailers. We see that battery electric vehicles, because they need large batteries, if you don't have dynamic charging, they will cost a little more than the combustion engine vehicles. But it's a pretty small extra expense when you consider the benefit of reducing operating costs in terms of energy and maintenance. Dynamic charging would probably reduce this a bit more. If I remember, I will mention a limitation of our way of calculating dynamic charging cost that possibly underestimates the cost per user a bit. Hydrogen, even in the most favorable scenarios, and this is pretty much when you assume everything to be on the side of hydrogen. Then we can get costs that are probably comparable with the average expected cost for fossil fuels and biofuels. Biofuels is 100% biofuels here. But going below that and going down to level of battery electric, we really do not see this happening in terms of cost. Much more likely that you end up, as David said, 3 times higher, 2-3 times higher in terms of cost. Electrofuels, same thing here. There is no supply, there is no cost competitiveness at all. Greenhouse gas intensity. We can see that all of the technologies significantly reduce emissions on the light vehicle side. We can also see that for electric vehicles, the production of the light vehicle is really an issue. If we transition all of the vehicles on the roads to electric, we have still only achieved somewhere between a 50 and a 80% emissions reduction. And we need to go down below that. So how do we go down below that? Well, cleaning up the electricity grid is certainly helping. Now this is 2035 grid electricities, which means that it's significantly cleaner than EU electricity today. But we do need to reduce the battery emissions. And I'm not an expert in how to manufacture batteries, but from my understanding is that most of these emissions come also from electricity input. Is that correct? Yes. Which means that if you clean up the grid, you're going to reduce these emissions as well. But if you import batteries from China, then they will also clean up their grid, but not as quickly as we will in Europe. So you will continue having significant emissions. If you reduce the battery capacity per vehicle, that significantly reduces the emission per vehicle also. On the heavy side, we have instead operations driving emissions. So in this case, we actually can reach significantly lower emissions by electrifying than for the light vehicles. So in some sense, it's the light vehicles that are the difficult to decarbonize sector, not the heavy vehicles. It's just that we're not doing the heavy vehicles yet. Hydrogen, we are going to have to pretty much produce the hydrogen on site at the fuel station if we want low emissions, and we do that with pure sustainable electricity. As long as there are truck transports of hydrogen involved, or as long as we use liquid hydrogen, there is very likely to be so much leakage, and hydrogen does contribute to global warming, that the emissions reductions disappear. We don't see any alternative to battery electric when it comes to decarbonization of heavy traffic. This is a complex and important figure. When we combine all of these strategies, we estimate the total scalability. How much of the transport do we think can use each of the technologies by 2035? Then we think new sales of battery electric vehicles, sales of new vehicles that are battery electric, that will, the potential of that is roughly the yellow bars. So in the Nordics and West Europe, in light traffic, we will reach quite significant market shares. In South and East Europe and in heavy vehicles, it's not as easy to have impact on this time frame because we need to gradually replace these old fleets. The average vehicle in Greece is about 15 years old. It takes time to replace this. Biofuels is green. It was about 6% today. This indicates a little more. It doesn't matter how we spread it out through Europe because it just displaces fossil fuels, and the planet doesn't care where these fossil fuels are burnt. hydrogen, the blue bars, what you see here is about 5 times the capacity that is mandated in the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation. So the AFIR targets are about somewhere between 1/4 and 0.5% of the truck transports in capacity. Scaling up hydrogen beyond this by 2035 does not seem likely, no matter if you do massive investments, and you have to consider then that we expected costs to be significantly higher than what you want to compete against, and emissions reductions not that great. So why would you? E-fuels, pretty much the same thing. We still need green hydrogen. That is expensive. We need even more capacity. Although it's a drop-in fuel, we still need supply to ramp up. We don't have that supply capacity today, so we're going to have to build it and then start distributing these and use them. And yeah, we don't see it being more than the red bar there, which you might not even see that it is. If we build electric roads, and electric roads here is really a placeholder for reducing battery size, increasing the rate of sales of new electric vehicles, so reaching 100% earlier, as well as doing retrofits starting in 2030. If we have another technology that can enable those, except electric roads, then I'm all for it. But we haven't found one. And with these three together, we expect the, what do you call that? Streckade. Right. That share of, so this impact would primarily be in East Europe and for trucks. That's where the retrofits really come in to make a major difference. If we look at the emissions that remain in 2030, they will be primarily from fossil fuels still. We have a significant share from battery electric vehicles, which is then primarily from battery production. And then we have this gray and black-yellow part, which is the same as this part up here, where we take this and we say, okay, now this runs on electric. So what is we're not going to get rid of all the emissions because we still have some from operating these in electric mode. And they will be mostly from battery production. So they should be quite low. We also transition these to ERS, which means that we have lower emissions per kilometer than we do for these ones, on average. So then we have this left, and we got rid of this part here. So the gray part represents what we think is the maximum achievable additional reduction that we can achieve through very, very ambitious electrification targets. We don't think we can do more than that. If you want to reduce the rest, you have to reduce total transport by some way. Looking at annual emissions, we were hoping for 77 to 87% reduction by 2035 in annual emissions. That is the little black marker there. We see that in our best case scenario, we are somewhere here at 36% reduction on average. We have pessimistic and optimistic scenarios, which indicated by the little arrow bar here. But really going below that, we don't see this happening in this time frame. And if we look at cumulative emissions, which is what matters for the climate, then we have a carbon budget. There is no fixed carbon budget for the EU or EU road transport, but using different ways of estimating this, we get somewhere in this black bar. With it passes zero, meaning that we maybe already spent our budget. But by 2035, there is no way to get this within the budget, because then we have to stop emitting now. we can get below here. The key thing to achieve at least is that in the current European Environmental Agency forecasts, we do not reach zero tailpipe emissions by 2050. We have done something like, I think, 60-70% reduction by then, and that is tailpipe emissions, which means that we're still running vehicles on combustion engine fuels by then. In our scenarios, at least, we reach 100% electric vehicles by 2050. Then we have no tailpipe emissions, and we're working with reducing these battery impacts. And that is maybe doable. To summarize, we do not expect any further contributions compared to today's level from biofuels, electrofuels, or hydrogen. We expect further greenhouse gas reductions from direct electrification, and we expect light-duty vehicle batteries to be the factor that counteracts this. Electric road systems would likely increase electrification and further reduce emissions from battery electric vehicles, especially on the light-duty side where we reduce battery emissions, and reduce cost primarily on the heavy-duty vehicle side. We do need conversions, and we see some indications that for conversions to take off, we need electric roads. We need to shrink the batteries in vehicles. That is for three reasons. It is cost, it is weight, which I didn't talk about. So you cannot put in more. The new powertrain that you install in the vehicle cannot weigh much more than the one you take out, because the vehicle cannot be used. It's not approved for that. It's not built for that. And battery supply is the third one. The forecast for total EU battery supply kind of match expected new vehicle sales with the big batteries. But if we were to start converting vehicles and put new batteries in those two, we don't have enough batteries. So we can't do that. If we want to use that battery supply and convert vehicles, we have to reduce the amount of battery per vehicle also. Building an electric road system by 2030 seems very challenging. I would like to have inputs during this conference for how to do it. This is not my area of expertise. Reducing transport demand in this time frame seems very difficult. I would like input on how to do that as well. Reaching the 2035 annual target for greenhouse gas reductions seems very difficult, but if we somehow were to replace all the vehicles, not only the new vehicles, by electric by then we would roughly reach it. Probably not realistic. And there is no way that we can not overshoot the budget. Thank you.
All right, we have some questions from the audience. I will start with a quick hydrogen question. Does the cost for hydrogen consider the dynamic prices for electricity between day, night, summer, winter? The ability to store energy?
We do not provide our own calculations for hydrogen, which means that you need to go to the sources that we have cited, but I believe so I think that was taken into account. They certainly assume hydrogen is produced with significantly cheaper electricity somewhere else.
All right, thank you. I have a question from Andreas Pettersson.
Yeah, I was thinking about if it's taken in consideration for the light vehicles, the light duty and passenger cars, for the big cost for ERS conversion. Will it be feasible to use it, or will the customer actually be willing to buy it because it's a considerable cost to do it when you have static chargers And in the diagrams, it looked like the ERS vehicles should be cheaper on the vehicle cost than the static chargers. And I was thinking, is that taken in consideration with the DC-DC converters and the pickup?
So on the light vehicle side,
Yeah.
we see that the cost is similar doing a conversion for a big battery plug-in charging and a small battery ERS charging vehicle, because you already use half the battery capacity. But we don't really see that you can do it on the big battery version because you can't fit that bigger battery into the car.
Yeah.
So you will, in that case, you can actually choose between a short range vehicle that is statically charged or dynamically charged.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand what you mean. Thank you.
All right. One more question. And please add your names in the questions so I can find you. But David, you had a...
Yes, thank you very much. It's a great presentation. I wonder whether you've considered retrofit of ERS pickup technologies on battery electric vehicles.
We have not.
Because that would seem to be the low-hanging fruit. If once you've got the battery electric vehicle, then to add the ERS pickup, whether it's on the bottom or the top, and then reduce the battery size, put that battery somewhere else. That would seem to be the quick and easy thing to do.
Yeah, we have not included that, but yes, I agree. One other technology we haven't looked at that might have some potential, that was not mentioned at all in the study, is electric trailers that can effectively remove the emissions associated with pulling a trailer, because you get a effectively weightless trailer. It cannot push the truck, but it can push itself. So by using this, you can at least decarbonize that half of fossil fuel emissions from existing combustion engine trucks.
Thank you to the audience. We will forward the rest of the questions, and we will have also another way that Lina will mention for collecting reflections on the study.